meet new people and provide information that hopefully you'll find helpful, some takeaways you can use. So just to make sure everyone's in the right place, we are here to talk about 5 ways to respond to conflict effectively. And I'm looking to see, how many people do we have on the participants right now, Haley? Do you see the number?
Yes, we have 9. So not including you and Jerry and myself, we've got 6 total.
Okay. So I was just asking because I want to maybe we'll spend a little time, so I can get to know who you are a little bit. So I'll introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask you just to introduce yourselves and maybe say 1 or 2 things. So we'll get there. So anyway, welcome. I'm Liz Hill. I am the Associate Director of the Ombuds office here on campus. And for those of you who might not be familiar with our office, it is a voluntary, confidential, and informal resource for all of you, right? So faculty, students, and staff. We help folks navigate university-related situations or concerns or issues that they might be having. And we do that by providing a space where people can candidly come and, because of the confidentiality, really share what's going on for them. We'll ask a lot of questions, really try to make sure we understand what's going on, and then work with you to, explore options, formal and informal options, and to strategize a path forward. And we do that with several different services that we provide. We do a lot of conflict coaching, communication coaching, so that would be more one-on-one work. We can provide informal mediation if that's something that comes up that makes sense for the participants involved. We also help going back and forth, shuttle diplomacy between people who aren't ready to come together, but need to have some back and forth communication. We can help escalate issues, and we can do that anonymously. We look for and identify trends on campus that maybe others, leaders and others in higher positions may be missing because they're not seeing things from all over campus like we are. So we can kind of connect the dots and let people know what's happening in an anonymous way, of course, no identifying information. And we provide trainings like this, and we do other things. So that kind of gives you an idea of who we are and what we do. Please feel free to check out our website. It's colorado.edu/ombuds. I'll put that link in the chat in a bit. And I also encourage you, if you aren't already, to follow us on Twitter. So maybe you can grab your phones right now. We are on Twitter. It's at CU Boulder Ombuds. And we do daily posts. Some are just for fun. Others are more informative. We do share our blog posts. We have a blog. It's called Ombuds. So we do share those when they come out. We share information about lunch and learns and other presentations we're doing. So if you hopefully like what you hear today, follow us, and you can always attend other things. So I am going to check the chat. I see the bubble. Oh, thanks, Haley. Thanks for putting that in there. And I'll put the Ombuds, if you can find it, ombuds.blog, I think is what it shows up. But if you just Google Ombuds, it should pop right up. So thanks for doing that. Okay. So moving right along here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. Well, actually, first, let me do this. Let me just go through our agenda, and then we'll do some quick introductions. So again, welcome, and we'll do introductions. The things we're going to cover today are a little bit about neuroscience, not a whole lot. Don't get nervous. And how it relates to the conflict. And then we're going to spend the majority of our time really focusing on the 5 conflict styles and talking about what those are and how you might use those most effectively. And then I'll leave time at the end for Q&A. And we are going to have some scenarios. I'll put you in breakout rooms, some scenarios to practice with. So let's go ahead. I'll stop sharing in a moment, but if you could just go around and we'll do popcorn style. So I'll pick the first person, and then when you're done, you pick the next person. And just, share your name, which I can also see, but what department or area of study you're in, and what's your favorite thing about Colorado? All right, especially this time of year, it's so beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share so I can see you. So Lottie, I'm going to pick on you. I see you're driving. Maybe I don't want to pick on you. Are you okay? You're not driving?
Yeah, I'm not driving. No, my roommate's driving.
Okay, as long as you're being safe.
No, we're safe. We're good.
I don't want to cause any accidents. You're right next to me, so I'm going to pick on you. Go ahead and just share what department and what you love about Colorado.
All right, sure. So yeah, I'm Lottie Stewart. I'm a second year in the biochemistry PhD program. And a favorite thing for me about Colorado is probably the summer thunder and lightning storms. I'm not used to those, so I've really had fun experiencing those.
Oh, that's great. May I ask, when you say you're not used to those, where did you grow up or where did you move here from?
I'm from Oregon, Eugene, Oregon. So, I mean, I'm used to the rain and I love the rain, but like we never have the really fun thunder and lightning shows that happen here. And just like how quickly they come and go. And then you get the blue skies. Like, I don't know. I think that's really cool.
It is cool. That's a great one. I haven't heard anyone share that. That's a good one. Thank you. Are you able to see who's next to you or no?
Yeah. So, how about Carissa? I think I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yeah, I'm Carissa. I'm in the Masters of the Environment graduate program. I'm a first year specializing in renewable energy. And one thing that I love about Colorado is the beautiful mountains. No surprise there.
That's
From
also a great
Minnesota.
choice.
I'll pass it on to Katie Ray.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Ray. I'm a first year master's student in Atlas in the creative technologies track. And I've been born and raised in Colorado and I really love our seasons. We basically get all 4 seasons, which is really cool, and none of them are too extreme.
Excellent.
And for participants, I'll go with Dwayne.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dwayne Bird. I'm in the first year of my executive MBA program at the Leeds School of Business, and I work for Maxar Technologies here in the Westminster area. And my favorite thing is getting outdoors, whether it be summer, winter, spring, or fall. Just getting outdoors and hiking or camping and doing some fun stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Dwayne.
And I'll turn it over to Jess.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Jess. I'm a 6th year student in the chemistry PhD program. I actually just defended on Monday, so I am on my way out. Thank you. And my favorite thing about Colorado is also the mountains. No surprise, I like running on the trails and ultra running.
Oh, wow. And
yeah, it's a good time, you eat a lot, so it's more like hiking and snacking.
I love it. Great. All right.
And I'll popcorn to Gabriel. Have you gone yet?
No, I haven't. Hi, I'm Gabe, philosophy MA, and I like the Flatirons. Just climbed them for the first time, which was cool but scary. I'll pass it on to Aislinn.
Last one. If I counted right. Aislinn, yes. Oh, okay. Okay, no problem. Thanks for letting us know. We'll definitely respect that. If I forget, just ping me and just do what you just did. That's perfect. Thank you. Okay. All right. So moving right along. Thanks for doing that. It's nice to get to know who's here a little bit. So let me go back. So our first exercise is going to be this one here. I'm going to ask you in a moment to close your eyes and I'm going to say a word. And what I want you to do is just take a second or two to see what comes up for you when I say this word. And if you're comfortable sharing, there's no pressure to do so. Feel free to type what comes up for you in the chat. Okay, so go ahead and close your eyes. And the word is conflict. All right, you can start opening your eyes and kind of think about what comes up for you when I say that. And if you're comfortable, go ahead and start using the chat to share. What did you see? Tension. Thanks, Haley. 2 people arguing. Anxiety. Yes, a feeling came. So 2 feelings, tension and anxiety. 2 feelings came up for people. Discomfort, another feeling. Yeah. So lots of feelers here. The confrontation. Jeff, the Achilles and Hector outside Troy. I love it. That's quite a visual. Thank you. Gabriel, disagreement. Yes. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. So what we really want to be thinking about kind of as we frame this conversation is, this is very typical anger. Yes, Katie Ray, anger. And this is typical, right? I think many of us, and a lot of it's going to depend on your own personal experiences, how you were raised, your communication styles, all of that, of when you hear the word conflict, kind of the paradigm you put it in. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it something in between? You know, and that's going to be your go-to response. Not right or wrong, right? Not good or bad. It just is. And that's okay. We're all human. We all have it. So the question I want you to be thinking about as we go through today's workshop is, how is that working for you? You know, is it time to reassess your relationship or your affiliation with conflict and think about ways to shift? Because, you know, honestly, as we look at this, I think we can all agree most of these descriptions that you came up with are not awesome, right? They're not super positive. They're more on the negative end of the spectrum, and that's not great. It's not a great place to be for many of us. So we want to shift that, and that's really our goal. So bear with me, and we'll work through it. All right. So moving on here, the definition of conflict that I'm going to use for purposes of today, and I'm sure if you Googled it, you'd find many, is that it's really any time we have a situation in which the concerns, the desires, or perspectives of one person are different from another person, and it creates what we would call a conflict. And again, it's not good or bad, right? It's just human, it's nature, that is just the society we live in. So some hard truths I want us to kind of just wrap our heads around and get used to is that, number one, it's inevitable, right? So the purpose, if you were hoping that you were going to come here today and we were going to eliminate conflict from our lives, I'm sorry to disappoint you. That's not the goal today. The goal is to figure out, how do we just handle it effectively when it does happen? It's neutral, it's inevitable, it's going to happen. It's not good or bad. The question is, how do we handle it? That's what's good or bad. It's our management, it's our response, not our reaction. We could maybe have a negative reaction, but how we ultimately respond to it. So rather than trying to eliminate it from our lives, I propose we focus our energy on learning how to deal with conflict better. And if we do handle conflict better, we'll feel better, right? We'll accomplish more, and we'll have hopefully less stress in our lives. And we could all use a little less stress in our lives, probably. Poorly handled conflict, as you might imagine, as you probably have seen, right, in your day-to-day life, hurts us as individuals, and ultimately in your role as a student, or as you go out, and some of you are already in the workforce, some of you are going out into the workforce, maybe you've been in the workforce, you know, and even as a student, it's going to make you less productive. It's also going to make the organization that you're in less productive. You know, it's wasting time, it's increasing stress, it harms relationships, it erodes trust. Right? What else can you think of? I mean, I've named a few, but go ahead, use the chat. What else do you think when we don't handle conflict well? What happens? What are the consequences of that? Hurt feelings. Thanks, Dwayne. Yes. Awkwardness. Yes. We've all had those awkward moments. And problems don't get solved. Kind Sometimes if we're not handling it well, things just fester. They don't get addressed. People stop engaging, right? That kind of goes with the awkwardness too, Jess, right? Like you're walking on eggshells, you know, maybe you don't know where someone stands, you're making up all sorts of stories and assumptions about what's happening. They may be right, they may not. You feel isolated, you withdraw, sure. All of these things, all of these happen. Thank you. Yes, you're spot on. So as you might imagine, in our office, feeling invalidated, yes. In the Ombuds office, right, we deal with conflict all day, every day. And as a result, because we deal with all constituents here on campus, we see a wide variety of things, and at all levels of the organization. So again, it kind of goes back to, it's inevitable, it's neutral, it's right, it's not good or bad, it just happens. And so we see that happening on a day-to-day basis. And so when we think about, well, what does resolution look like? We're really looking at, well, what are the options, right? We want to be strategic and thoughtful. What's the approach? It's often not going to be that initial reaction that we're going to talk about in a minute. So we want to be thoughtful about it. We want to really understand what's happening. And that's our role as an ombuds, right? To help really understand what's going on. And most importantly, for you as the visitor, as well as the ombuds, to really be thinking about, what do you really want, right, out of this? This is happening, right? The question is, where do you want to go from here? What do you really want for yourself, for the other person or persons, for the relationship, for the department, for the university, for your future, all of those things. Really thinking, what do you really want? Because that will help, as we're going to learn it here today, that will also help inform what conflict style to use in any given situation, because it might vary, it might change depending on the situation. So we want it to be appropriate. We want it to be effective, most importantly, right? We want to get a good outcome. All right. So what happens to us when we're in conflict? Well, if you ask a neuroscientist, they would say that our brains are hardwired to respond to conflict in a certain way. So basically, our brain receives signals and cues telling us that we are under threat. And when we experience something that we perceive as a threat, as a human being, we instinctively go into, and I know you've heard these phrases before, fight, flight, or freeze, right? Those are the initial, our brain's threatened reactions. And while these may have been super helpful responses when our survival was truly at risk, we had like lions and tigers and bears maybe chasing us, it's not super helpful when we are in an otherwise safe environment and we want to address a conflict constructively. Those initial reactions, our brain hasn't caught up, right? Has not evolved enough to automatically go to that. We have to be intentional about it. So I want to use like a camera analogy. Our primal emotional response to conflict is a lot like using an automatic camera. We take a picture, it is instantly, right, when triggered, and it may or may not be in focus, and it may not even be capturing what we really want to see. And that's what our lizard, we call it the lizard brain, and we'll talk more about the amygdala in a minute, operates like. On the other hand, a camera that requires us to kind of play with it and do some more manual focusing, it might take a little longer, but we're more control in the outcome. We're more in control of what does that picture look like? Is it in focus, right? Is it achieving what we ultimately want to have? And so that's kind of like how our brain works in our thinking. And when we have access to our executive functions, that frontal lobe, which I'm going to talk about now, we're able to do that. So here's what our brain looks like. We have our frontal lobe, we have our little amygdala here and our brainstem. So what I just described to you is what Daniel Goleman has coined the term, is the amygdala hijack. I'm just going to look. Give me a thumbs up. You can use a little reaction bar. Give me a thumbs up if you've heard that term before, amygdala hijack. Yeah, some of you have. Okay, good. Yeah. So if you haven't, you can go to, he's got a book, it's called Emotional Intelligence, Why EQ Matters More Than IQ. And so he talks a lot about this there, but I'm not going to get into all the I promised you I wouldn't go too deep into neuroscience, and I won't. But I do want to give you a flavor of what's happening here, because I think it's important for what we're going to be talking about. And essentially, the amygdala hijack is an emotional response that's immediate, it's overwhelming, and often it's out of measure, right? It's disproportionate to what's actually happening. And again, there's no judgment here. This happens to all of us, right? And this happens because it's been triggered by our brain as a threat, okay? And this happens when the amygdala basically hijacks our response to stress. And when this amygdala gets hijacked, it expands, right? It has a physiological reaction and essentially disables this frontal lobe part of our brain here. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm using my cursor on my screen and you can't see that. So over here's our frontal lobes. Okay, you can now. Okay, and here's our amygdala. Okay, so thank you, Gabriel, for letting me know you can see that now. So this is what gets hijacked, and essentially when this is inflamed and aggravated, this can't work. And do you all know what the frontal lobe does? What part, what that helps us with? I don't know, put it in the chat if you know. Decision making, yeah, essentially that's correct. It's our, what helps us be rational, reasonable human beings, right? It's our reason and our ration, our decision, our intelligent decision making. And so when that amygdala hijack happens, that frontal lobe physically cannot operate. Like you can't have both at the same time. So we want to make sure that we're making clear, rational decisions. We want to control our responses. So while we can't stop the brain from acting in this way, we can be aware of it. And we'll talk in a second about how you might know this is happening. Because if we can be aware of it, then what we can do is we can be more intentional. We can, over time and practice, we can intentionally develop the ability to regulate our responses. What does that mean? That means giving our brain time, usually about at least 90 seconds for that initial reaction, right? We want to allow our brain to catch up with our emotions. And that's where, maybe you've taken or you've heard about different breathing exercises, or people say, take a walk, or, maybe pause the conversation. Maybe it's just taking a really long sip of water. Right? Allowing our brain to process what's happening, because we know it's happening, right? And we want to be more in control. Okay, so we want to do that and be effective. Okay. So moving on. So just some thoughts here in the same kind of vein, if you will, is when we are in conflict, we're going to feel things, right? We're going to have emotional responses. We're going to have physiological responses, and that's going to then drive our behavior, right? Because we're telling ourselves a story about what's happening. We're having this response, and then that's going to drive our behavior. So some thoughts in the chat, like, when you think about the emotions or the physiological changes that happen for you personally, or your behavior, how that changes when you feel like you're in this fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? When you're having an amygdala hijack, what happens for you? What do you notice? High heart rate, spot on. Yes, Lottie. Sweaty, common. Yes. Heart rate in, okay, so 2 heart rate increases. Yeah, and you can literally feel it, right? Like you feel like your heart is like literally beating out of your chest. It's like in your throat, right? I get that too. Shallow breathing, right? So if you're a deep breather, that's great. And then you notice your breathing changes. Those are all, and those are more the physiological responses that you're going to feel. People may or may not see those in you, but you feel them. You know they're happening. You get scatterbrained, flustered. Yes, kind of like get that fog brain. Okay, all that's right. All of those are things that happen to people. So the question becomes, what are strategies we use? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'm curious, like what strategies, and maybe we can learn from each other. What strategies do you use? How do you use that 90 seconds or more to kind of get that under control? What do you do? Oh, someone took heart math. Is that heart math? The 4-4-4 breathing techniques?
Yeah, so like somebody told me you like breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then you just repeat that. And I've noticed that really helps me when I start getting a little nervous about something. Then I'll just be like, sort of like, I need to take some time and then do that. And that's helped sort of calm me down.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. That's excellent. So if others haven't heard of that before, that's a really great tip. Any others? And yeah, feel free to unmute yourself. You don't have to put everything in the chat. We can take a second, unmute yourself. What other ideas do people have? Mindfulness. Yeah, so really, I don't know if that means like meditating and just really being focused and intentional, or if you had something else in mind, Jess.
Yeah, just like being aware of what's happening and kind of like putting a name to the emotion, I think helps.
Yes, exactly. That's how many have you all seen? There's this like, I have it hanging up in my kids' hallway. It's this big poster and it's got all, like, I don't know, it's probably got like 20 something different emotional expressions with a name. And it really helps them learn, and it helps all of us learn, me too. Like how to really like identify what are we feeling, right? Because I think we all kind of go to, oh, happy, sad, angry, frustrated. But there's so many other words, like we need to like expand our vocabulary, right? Because there's so many different emotions that come up. And the more we become aware of what's happening, then I think the better we can address it and handle it. Okay. So thank you for that. Moving on. Anyone else want to chime in before I move on? I don't want to cut anyone off.
Yeah, so sometimes it helps to assume the other person did not intend to trigger those feelings of anger.
That's
just how
awesome.
Right, that's how we responded, but that was not their intent.
So that's a really sophisticated coping mechanism. And I don't know if you've taken, there's so many great workshops on campus. One of them is Crucial Conversations, and there's others for exactly that, like really taking a step back, because what you're describing is you're changing the story rather than going to a story of that hurt and that didn't feel good, I'm offended, or whatever it might be. Taking a step back and thinking like, what don't I know? Like assuming positive intent and thinking there might be something else going on here. Maybe I misunderstood, or that wasn't the intention. And maybe hopefully then you're asking questions and learning more about what's really going on. So
yeah,
awesome.
I haven't taken any seminars at CU. I'm just a parent.
Yes, right. Parenting is a seminar in and of itself, right? On hands learning seminar. Good. Well, thank you for sharing that. Jess thought that was good too. All right. Okay, moving right along. So these things, I bring this up because these things can really help us recognize when we're experiencing that amygdala hijack, because we want to get that under control before we move into the meat of today, which is the 5 conflict handling styles. So here we go. Let me just pause there and just check in. Everyone doing all right? Anyone need anything? I wasn't probably going to give a break, but if you need one, of course, please feel free to come and go as you need to, or let me know. All right, everyone all right? Thumbs up. Okay. So as we move into the 5 conflict handling styles, I just want to kind of give an overview of what they are. Then we're going to take a little bit of you have an assessment in your packet. So hopefully all of you have that handy. If not, I could probably find a way to share it on the screen to kind of get a kind of gauge your natural go-to styles. And we'll talk more about that. And then we'll dive into each one individually to learn a little bit more about each. And then we'll practice using them and what questions you ask to think about, what style is best for this situation. So that's kind of the game plan here. So this just really shows an overview of it's a little blurry, I apologize for that, but this kind of gives you an overview that in conflict situations, we're really describing behavior or conflict style along the 2 dimensions, right? We have the assertiveness here and the cooperativeness down here. So this identifies the extent to which, an individual attempts to satisfy their own concerns, right? Versus the extent to which an individual attempts to satisfy the other person's concerns. And these are the 2 dimensions that Thomas Kilman, who we're going to learn about, and it's in your packet, a little description of him and his company. This is the spectrum or the planes that he puts the 5 different styles. So you have competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and accommodating. So competing, just for example, as you can imagine, is going to be high on the assertiveness, right? Satisfying their own, and low on the cooperativeness, right? Not really thinking about the other person and not having a whole lot of regard for the other person. On the opposite side, right, you've got collaborating, which is going to be high in both. Well, actually, it's not really the opposite side, is it? But you've got a difference here with collaborating, where it's going to be high on the assertiveness as well as high on the cooperativeness. Then you've got the accommodating, which is the true opposite, which is going to be low on the assertiveness, right, and high on the cooperativeness. So don't worry, we're gonna get more into this, but I just kind of want to give you an idea of how that works. Okay. So on page, I think it depends on which handout, because Kaylee sent out 2. That's my fault, not hers, because I couldn't get my act together. So I sent out 1, and then I did better, I hope, and sent out another one. So if you're in the newer one that she sent out, the fillable PDF, The assessment that I'm referring to is, and hopefully you've been looking at this to follow along, so it has some helpful stuff in here, is on page 6. And if you're using the old version, I think it's on page 3. And so what we want to do is we want to turn to that, because what I'd like you to do is I'm going to give you as much time as you need. I'll give you up to 10 minutes and just give me a thumbs up when you're done. And I'll kind of watch the screen. But this is an abbreviated version of what we call the Thomas Kilmann Instrument Assessment, also known as TKI. And it's a tool that assesses an individual's typical behavior in conflict situations. And it describes the behavior between those two continuums, 2 dimensions we just talked about. So I'll give you the time. And what I want you to do is answer the questions to best reflect how you would typically behave, not how you know or think you should be, but be honest with yourself, how you would really behave based on whatever it's asking you. And you can use a personal, have an example in your head, personal example or professional. You probably want to stick to one or the other for all the questions. And then when you're done, you will score at the bottom of the page. You'll see a scoring sheet. And I'm looking at mine here. We'll just put the score for each question and do a tally, okay? Because that will help us better understand what your natural go-to is, where you gravitate, okay? All right, so I don't have a timer screen, so I'll just watch my watch. It's 10:35. So go ahead and take a few minutes. Anyone, unmute yourself. Anyone not have that and need help with that? Okay, good. I don't see anyone raising their hands. Sorry to interrupt. I just noticed there's a few new names popping up on the people joining. So if you're just now joining, we're on page 6 of the most recent participant guide, taking the conflict style assessment. If you have the old version that went out yesterday, it'd be on page 3. Feel free to chat me any questions. I'm happy to answer. We've got about 3 minutes, and as you're finishing up the answers, be sure to tally the scores at the bottom of the page. All right, it looks like some of you might be finishing up. We'll check in a minute when you can just give me a thumbs up if you're done. Okay, thanks. I see a couple. Okay. Right. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and come back together. If you're still tallying, no problem. Keep working. And I'm going to move ahead. This shouldn't interfere too much with your math, hopefully. All right. So thanks for doing that. Surprises before I kind of dive in here. Any surprises? I'm going to stop sharing that anyone wants to share with how they scored. And we'll talk about what the scores mean in a minute, but any surprises about what came out higher for you, or are you all pretty in tune with your how you handle conflict? I see Lottie nodding, yes. And you're out of the car now, that's good. All right, anyone else have any thoughts before we move on? Surprises? No? Okay, well, then maybe you're all very self-aware and now we just need to learn maybe how to use other styles. So we'll talk about that. All right. So moving right along, as I'm hoping you're a smart group, I'm guessing you've already figured this out, but there's no right or wrong answer here, right? So this isn't like most tests. All of 5 of these model styles or modes is what the TKI often calls them, as modes, are going to be useful. It just really depends on a variety of factors, including the relationship, what you want, right? The situation itself, right? We're going to, we have to adapt. And that's really the underlying message here today is the more agile we can become in using all different styles, the more effective we can be. And we're going to talk about that. So each of these represents a set of useful social skills. And our conventional wisdom, and some of these may or may not ring true for you, recognizes, for example, that, we use all these little cliches, 2 heads are better than 1, right? That would be, i.e., collaborating. We also hear people say, kill your enemies with kindness, that would maybe be more of an accommodating approach. Or we hear things like split the difference, that would be compromising. Leave well enough alone, avoiding, right? Don't go down there. Don't, pick your battles. That's another one, pick your battles. And might makes right, that would be more of the competing things that we hear. So we hear all these things, and the reality is they're all true in different situations. And the effectiveness of a given conflict handling mode is really going to depend on that specific situation and what skill you want to use. So I want to really hit home that you are all capable of using all 5 conflict handling modes. And most people, and I'd love to, maybe we could talk in a second about kind of what came up for some of you if you're willing to share, because most people aren't going to have just one that just stands out. Some people do, but most people aren't going to have one that really stands out above the rest. They're going to be like one that maybe have 1 or 2 points more, maybe a couple that maybe have the same number of points in the middle, and then maybe one that scored a little bit less, right? That's often very common because, most people aren't that rigid, right? They don't have like a one size fits all mentality. They use, but the reality is we do use some more often than others. And then because we become comfortable with them, become skilled in them, we rely on them, even when maybe that's not the best approach. So you might have a clear favorite. The conflict behaviors that you use are going to be the result, and this of course goes back to what we were talking about with how we identify with conflict, right? It's going to be a result of both your personal predispositions, right? We're all predisposed to a certain, personality, certain approach, as well as, what we've been taught, right? What we've experienced. And of course, what's required in any given situation. Sometimes you're going to have to go into competitive mode, even if your natural inclination is to avoid or to collaborate or to accommodate for that. So it's really going to be situational. So before I move on and bring us back to our grid and we dive into each, anyone willing to share? I know I didn't see anyone wanting to share surprises, but anyone willing to share kind of how they ranked, or like, was there a big spread? Was everything kind of close, together? Anyone willing to share that? And there's no pressure.
So I'll talk about it a little bit. I had started reading through this, and I realized that I had to pick a role that I play to answer these questions. Like I had to say, okay, this is not a family situation. This is a work situation.
Right.
Because if I answered it from the family side, it would get totally different responses. And then I thought, 10 years ago when I had little kids, I would get a different response than I do today when I have older kids who are they're in high school and starting college. So I think you're exactly right that it depends on the situation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yes, that's right. That's a great summary of what we're talking about. Yes, it is situational, and 100%. And that's why, I don't know if you heard it or not in the beginning, before you did the test, I did mention, like, really put yourself either in a professional space or a personal space, because you're absolutely right, Dwayne. Like, I think a lot of us are in the same boat. How we're going to address something and respond to something in our personal lives is going to look very different than in our professional lives. And even as you noted, it'll change over time, with different circumstances and different factors. So yes, all of that. Yes, yes. Very good. Anyone else? Okay, well, we can move on. No problem. All right. So this is just another, you've already seen this, looks a little different. But this is the grid, right? These all fall on these two dimensions again, the assertiveness and the cooperativeness. And I don't think I need to go through each. You can kind of look at it and see, okay, this is going to be more assertive, less cooperative. This is going to be right in the middle, equally assertive and equally cooperative. This one's going to be less cooperative and less assertive. And we'll talk about that because that might be a little confusing. And on, right? This one's more cooperative, less assertive, accommodating. So let's look at each one. We're going to start with, and your packets, your handout should follow along. Hopefully it matches the same order. If not, you might have to just turn back and forth a little bit, but hopefully not. So the first one is the accommodating. So generally speaking, accommodating is when you are willing to sacrifice your own needs and desires for others, right? For the other people involved. You're going to lose. And this is TKI language, the lose win. I don't love it, but this is what they use. You lose, they win. Some people think accommodating means you're always a doormat. And I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say that's true. Accommodation has its place. Do you always want to be accommodating? Is that going to ultimately build resentment and make you feel like a doormat? Sure, perhaps. But it's not, but it's also a very useful style, right? It's best when, maybe you aren't the expert, and this is all in the materials, right? You can read right along with me. You're not the subject matter expert on something, or maybe you just don't care, right? Maybe, it kind of goes back to picking your battles. Maybe this isn't just something you just don't care about. And so you're more than happy to accommodate them and move on, because there might be something else down the road that you do care about, and you are going to have to be more assertive, right? Maybe even competitive, right? Okay, so just kind of boiling it down, here's the dimensions again, the unassertive and cooperative, and here are some of the traits. And when I get to the pros and cons, I'd love to hear from you, and it's in your materials. So you don't have to listen to me all the time, but here with accommodating, you are neglecting your own concerns for the other person. That is ultimately what accommodating means. It might be selfless generosity. It might be because there's a hierarchy and you feel like you have to because you're not in a position of power. Or it might be yielding to the point of view, again, because you just don't care enough, or maybe you're just not really sure, right? Maybe you just don't know enough to take a more affirmative or assertive stance. So you defer, right? That would be more the accommodating mode. But how about this? Oops, sorry. Let's look at page 9 of your handout here. Anyone feel like talking? Anyone willing to share? Like, let's just run through this. What are some of the pros and cons? There's going to be pros and cons to all of these. Let's just be clear on that now. Anyone want to read those with us? Jerry, are you still there? You want to read for us? I don't know if you have the
Okay,
handout.
I'm still here. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, do you have the handout?
No, I don't.
Oh, well, that's not going to help you. How are you gonna do that?
I
Sorry.
can't do it. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. All right, I'll do the first one. All right. So accommodating is typically done when we want to maintain the relationship. That's another example I didn't really mention, when maybe the relationship is more important than the issue or whatever's at hand, right? So we want to give in to maintain that relationship. So the pros are, especially if we're outmatched, right? Maybe we're in a hierarchical or situation, is that it's going to minimize injury. There's going to be less fallout, and relationships are maintained. The cons are that, as I mentioned earlier, if you're always a comment, if that's always your go-to style, and you aren't doing it because you want to, you're doing it because you feel like you have to, or because you haven't developed the skills to collaborate or to compete, it is going to build resentment. Okay. And it also can be used to exploit the weak. And what do I mean by that? That's really more, again, I mean by not physically weak, but like power differentials, right? If someone is always in a situation where the consequences are just too high not to accommodate, well, then, yeah, they're going to be in that accommodation mode a lot. And if there's not a safe space to speak up or to express opinions or to disagree or to have any kind of dissension, which is one of the opportunities in conflict, is to have healthy dissension and have discussion and have disagreement and hopefully come to better outcomes, right? That would be opportunities we might see. Then yeah, it can be used to exploit. So those are some of the cons. Anyone else have their own they can think of? They want to either shout out or put in the chat. I'm just looking for my chat here. Here it is. Anyone else have anything they want to say on that? Okay, if not, we'll keep going. All right.
Say something, Liz.
Please, go ahead.
I guess with accommodating, a concern could be where if you're constantly sort of meeting the needs of others to maintain a relationship, then you're not looking out for your own self-interest. So again, this kind of gets into the exploitive role, but in a sense, maybe I could also see maybe your boss, whoever you work for, may not think you sort of think for your own, and that you don't really know what you want in that, because you're just always like, oh yeah, we can do whatever you want.
That's right. No, that's right. And I mean, I think we all here have been around enough to know that like it's got to be psychologically a safe space to do what you described, right? I mean, they may be expecting it, but if they're not creating an environment where that can happen, then people might default to, no, I'll just accommodate you every time, right? And then it creates that negative situation, kind of a negative situation. On page 10, I also included some examples of when you might use it, when you might not use it, and then signs of when you're using it too much. So I'm not going to read through all those, but just take a second and look at those. Anything stand out? Any questions, concerns? I'm sorry, Jerry, that you don't have this. Anything stand out for anyone? All make sense? Yeah. So accommodating is great, you know, for preserving harmony, keeping the peace. Again, we talked about it when something's just not that important to you. It's also, I love this, the emotional bank account. And I added that because I use that phrase a lot. You know, in any relationship, there's going to be times where we give more than we take and vice versa, right? And so the more we can make, especially in the workplace or in your higher ed experience, your graduate experience, if we can make deposits into that emotional bank account, right, to build rapport, to build trust, when we do have to push back on something, when we do have to, like Lottie's talking about, disagree or raise something, It's a lot easier, right? It's a lot easier to do that. If we're constantly making withdrawals, we get into a deficit, and then that's where relationships start to go badly, right? And tensions and other things, that trust erodes, et cetera. So we want to be, so this is accommodating can be a tool to make deposits into that emotional bank account. Okay, all right, moving on. I'm looking, I don't see any hands. Feel free to raise your hands or just unmute yourself and jump right in. Okay. So the next one that we want to talk about is the avoiding mode. I'm just trying to move my screen around a little bit. And this is when you don't try to satisfy yourself or other people in the conflict. Instead, you're really just avoiding it. You're staying away from the situation entirely. And this can be used when emotions are high, right? We talked about like taking some breathing space, and that could be considered avoiding, like just taking a break. Doesn't mean you're not going to come back to it, but in that moment, you're deciding not to address it right then and there. And that's a healthy use of avoiding. But to be honest, I see more often than not, people using it as a Band-Aid, right? Like, I'm just going to shuffle and I'm just going to sweep that under the rug, but then they don't come back to it, right? And they use avoiding to get out of an uncomfortable or awkward situation. And then when they don't come back to it, as you can imagine, nothing gets resolved, nothing gets addressed. And the topic is almost like permanently placed in a parking lot, right? So eventually, even if you're avoiding it now for good reasons, likely if it's an underlying issue, you're going to have to come back to it at some point. But that's okay if you want to just plan or be more strategic. And so when you turn to pages 9 and 10, you'll see how that plays out, right? On page 10, talks about when to use avoiding. There are times to use it, right? And then, of course, when not to use it. So I'm going to go to the next slide, but go ahead and start taking a look at that. So, again, this is unassertive and uncooperative. We're not addressing any concerns, but it might be used, right, to be diplomatic, to sidestep something, to be intentional and strategic about your timing of when you want to address it, or, of course, if it's a threatening situation, to get out, right? Of course, those would all be times to use it. But when you don't want to use it is when, you have to make a decision. You can't avoid something indefinitely if a decision needs to be made. So that would be not a helpful time to use it. Or if you're just, if you talk about it in crucial conversations, if you've taken that course here on campus, another great one I would recommend through organizational employee development, and you're welcome to take those, by the way, is that you're trying to avoid a difficult conversation, and we all do that, right? Like, oh, I really don't want to talk to that person, or I really don't want to bring this up. It's just too hard. Yes, it is hard. And maybe not in that moment, but eventually you might have to have that conversation. And this would be a great example of when you can come to Ombuds, right? If there's something like that going on for you and you really want to think through how to do it, what to say, how to frame it, come see us. We're happy to talk that through with you and give you the skills that you need so you can feel comfortable and confident going into that. All right. Thoughts or questions on avoiding? All right, cruising right along then. All right, so then we have collaborating, right? And that's right there in the middle, right? This is the win-win. I don't know if it was TKI terminology, maybe Stephen Covey terminology, these win-win, win-lose. So anyway, I may have misspoke there. But anyway, this would be considered the win-win. You're trying to find a resolution or a solution that satisfies everybody involved. Here's the thing with collaboration. It's not quick, right? So if you need to make a quick decision, or like if you're in charge of something and you have to make a decision, not everything is going to be a team collaboration. You might have to just make the decision and then deal with it later, because it takes time. It takes resources, energy, etc. So I see leaders encourage collaboration in many areas on campus, which is great. But it can often be difficult to get everyone what they want. So it does take time. And if it's a high risk situation, or again, a decision that needs to be made, you may not have time to collaborate every time. So, often I also see it misused. So oftentimes I hear people, bless you, talking about wanting collaboration, what they really mean is they want to compromise, right? Or they simply want to work together. And those are different things. You know, I mean, I know it's semantics, but those can be different things. Working together isn't always a true collaboration. True collaboration is where everyone gets input and there's a solution that truly satisfies everyone's needs. And that's hard to do. That's why compromise, which we're going to talk about, I think, next, is so much easier, right? Because people involved get some of what they want, but nobody gets everything they want or need. Okay, that's a compromise. Okay, so moving on here, this, you know, is assertive and cooperative. And again, it's trying to find a solution that fully satisfies everyone's concerns. And you can imagine, just think some of the conflicts you've been in or some of the situations or decision-making you've been in, how difficult that can be, especially if there's a lot of interests involved, right? Any thoughts or questions on that? And again, on page, actually now we're moving on to page 11, talks about, you know, when you would use these, when you would not use these. And then looking at page 9, some of the pros and cons. Pros, right? Creates mutual trust, maintains positive relationships, commitment. The cons might be, again, I've already mentioned it, time and energy. Okay. And I didn't do this for avoiding, but you can read it for yourself on page 9 of the pros and cons of avoiding as well. Any thoughts, questions on that? And the next one we're going to go to is actually competing. I don't see any hands up. And the only face I see is Lottie. So is everyone still here? Did it disappear, or is it just us having our own conversation? Okay. Sorry, thank you for this. Okay, I'm glad you're still here. Okay, great. All right, moving right along. So competing, again, right? High on the assertiveness, low on the cooperativeness. You're really trying to satisfy your concerns, and often, unfortunately, it's going to be at someone else's expense. So this is what Stephen Covey would dub the win-lose, right? Win, you lose. Okay. Now it doesn't mean, but it's a bad rap, right? Because it doesn't always need to be a bad thing. There are times we have to compete. We have to really fight for what we need or want. Okay. So I don't want you to think it's bad. Sometimes competition is necessary. And it really, again, going back to what Dwayne was saying, it really is going to depend on the situation. All right. Now, having said all of that, if this is your go-to style, I'm not picking on anyone this came out the highest on your assessment, that being a competitive person, nothing wrong with it. And when you're leading others, or when you're in situations where you're leading others, if you only use the style, there are some negative consequences, right? You might be ineffective. You might be really isolating people, you know, not being approached. People aren't going to see you as approachable. You might be missing out on information, right? People might be turning to yes people. They just say yes because they don't want to fight with you, but they really don't agree. You're not getting the benefit of that additional information. So there can be pros and cons. So let's look at that. So the competing, the pros and cons are going to be, you know, goal-oriented, right? You're getting things done, you're making decisions, and it's quick, right? You do need to use this in many situations. You need to make a quick decision. I know not everyone's going to like this, but I have to do it, right? And that's the way, what you have to do. The cons are, over time, if it happens all the time, it can breed hostility. People will start to get upset about it. Okay. Any questions or thoughts on this? And then we'll get to our last one before we do some scenarios.
So I don't know that they have to be individual. I mean, like when I go into a situation, I don't know all the answers, and I don't know what the outcome is going to be. So I don't necessarily, I try to go in as a collaborator, and I might get a collaborative solution. I might get a compromise, or it might turn into a competition of the negotiation.
Yes, it might shift.
Okay.
That's an excellent point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think I failed to even mention. Yes, you might go in and I think actually, if I'm forgetting which scenarios I put in for today, But I think one of the scenarios, and this is kind of, if you're listening, this is going to be kind of like a sneak peek, a tip, might do exactly that, Dwayne. I think in certain situations you might go in with one, but depending on how that goes or what kind of information or feedback you get, you might have to shift. Yes. So yes, it's not always, that's why you have to constantly be monitoring the situation and what's happening. Because we can all imagine, right? I'm just thinking like a situation where like, you're like, I am right. And I am going to fight for this, right? And you go in and you're ready for the fight. You're ready to compete. And then you learn something that you didn't know before. And that's very humbling, right? And you're like, oh, right? And then it's time to backpedal or maybe try to save face, right? And then you're going to shift. Maybe you are going to then collaborate or accommodate, right? So yes, point well taken. Thank you. All right, last one, compromising. So compromising, I've mentioned this before, the solution, the resolution is typically, it's going to satisfy, but not fully, right? It's a partial satisfaction. There's no winners or losers. It's acceptable. It's something that everyone can live with. And I often use this phrase, I don't use the word phrase compromising, but I use the phrase something we can live with when I do mediations. Because when you do a mediation, that's often what you ultimately end up doing, is everyone's giving up something and everyone's getting something. So, it's a lot more give and take. No one leaves 100% satisfied, but no one hopefully leaves unhappy either, right? Everyone leaves with something that they can work with. So I'm just looking here at my notes. The one of the pitfalls, though, if you're a leader or in a situation of hierarchy where you're only compromising, is you might start getting taken advantage of, right? Your team or people who work with you might start to take advantage of that and ask for more than what they need because they know they'll get the compromise will be what they want, so they ask for more, right? It's kind of like when you're in a negotiation for a house, right? I don't know how many people have bought houses. One of the common strategies is, especially if you're the seller, is to start really high, knowing that what you really want or need is like somewhere kind of in the middle or less than that, or when you're going to get into that offer and acceptance situation, right? Because you know that you're going to land somewhere in the middle, and that's really what you expected or want, right? So you start high or low. So it's kind of the same thing here. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this and then we'll move on. Again, it's moderate. You're trying to find a mutually acceptable solution, and it might be splitting the difference. So let's go ahead and look at that. It's on page 12 of your handout, but first I'll go through the pros and cons. It's a 50-50. The pros are it's useful when things are really complex and there's just too much. You're not going to get that true collaborative where everyone leaves 100% satisfied. So it's too complex for that. And it also works well when everyone's of equal power. It's more difficult when there's a hierarchical or power imbalance. And the cons are, like I've already mentioned, is no one leaves fully satisfied. And sometimes you don't get the best solutions. You get, like I said, things that you can live with. And then on page 12, it talks about examples of when you would use this and when you would not use this. Okay. So thoughts, questions before we go into some scenario work. Does this all make sense? Have you heard this before? Am I telling you things that you already know? Come on off, talk to me.
So some of these things I have heard, some of the things I haven't. I'm more familiar with like the values of like compromising and collaborating and accommodating, but then sort of the pros and cons to competing or avoiding. I usually hear they're like one end of the spectrum where they're both not good methods. So hearing that there's like a time and place for them, I was aware of, but to actually have it more explicitly said like this has been helpful.
Great. Oh, thanks. That's great. Thanks, Lottie. And yeah, I think that's right. And I think, yeah, I think avoiding and competing get a bad rap. Like they just, everyone thinks that they're both bad all the time. Oh, like you said, there's a time and a place. Aislinn, is it okay if I read your comment out loud? I don't know if I think everyone can see it. Yeah. So I feel like Aislinn says, I feel like I'm familiar, but not this in depth. Okay. Or at least this well acknowledged example of the difference between the two and when to use. Good. Okay. So I just want to make sure I'm giving you something that you can use and that's helpful. And I'm not going to you can all read. So I'm not going to read through all this. You've got it. You can look at it. And now, as we go through the scenarios, especially, you can refer back to it and really think about, what would I do here? So let's do that. Anyone else? I don't see any other hands up. Okay. Thanks, Lottie. I appreciate that. And Aislinn, thank you. All right. Where am I? Okay. So the question is always going to be, right, which is most effective? And we've talked about that. It depends. Right? That's the answer. So now that you understand you have 5 different approaches, and that we all naturally are going to gravitate to maybe 1, 2, maybe 3, maybe you had more, I don't know. We still want to really develop the skill set that we can use all 5 when appropriate, when evaluating the situation and determining what will be most effective to get the outcome we're looking for. So there's some questions, some key questions you can ask, and here they are, to really think about what style do I use. And these questions tie in directly with the when to use, when not to use that I've given you. Is there overwhelming stress involved, right? Is it something that you just can't handle right now and tackle right now? Too much emotion, right? Is it a complex or a simple situation? We talked about, right, that complex, oftentimes compromising is going to be the way to go. How important is a topic to us? How much time and energy am I willing to spend on this? That will inform. How much time do we have? What's the level of trust, right? The relationship, that too is going to play in. And we talked about some examples of that, especially with imbalances, right? Is there enough trust to disagree or to be competitive or even to be collaborative? Or are we feel like we have to either avoid or accommodate or maybe compromise, right? What's the skill level of the people involved? Are they good listeners? Do they have good communication skills? Do they have conflict resolution experience? Are they thinking similar to me or not? What's the culture? That's going to inform the psychological safety and how comfortable we feel addressing situations. And how important is the relationship? Do we even care? Are we ever going to see this person again? Maybe it truly doesn't matter, right? So those are all the kinds of things we're thinking about. So what I'd like to do is on pages 13, hopefully that matches what you have. There's 2 scenarios. And Haley, if it's okay with you, I was going to, maybe I'll just manually put people in breakout rooms. I was going to do it automatically, but then we're all going to, then, I don't know, Jerry, do you want to go into a breakout room with folks? I don't know if you have the stuff in front of you.
No, Liz, I can't do that. I've got to drop off because I've got another meeting in 5 minutes.
Got it. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I didn't mess things up. Okay. So without Jerry, I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment. Makes it easier. Without Jerry, we've got 1, 2. Kayla, did you want to do it? Sure. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So why don't I just do 3 rooms of 3? Do you all want to choose your own, or should I have you automatically put in rooms? Any preferences? Does it matter? Either way. Okay. So I'm going to create 3 rooms. I'm just going to say assign automatically, and I think it's just going to put you somewhere. Okay. And I'll come around and check on you. All right. So take a few minutes and just work on the first one for now, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay. All right.
Hello. I don't know if Haley's working on this.
Hi, yeah, I'm happy to work on it with both of you.
Oh, I can't hear you, Haley.
Oh, you can't?
I'm not sure if that's me or if that's you.
Oh, I can hear Haley.
Carissa, you can hear me?
Oh, God, it's probably me. I'm gonna restart my headphones. I'll be back in a second.
Okay.
Well, I'll just, maybe we could just take a second and read this.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we should start there.
All right, I think I'm back.
Can you hear me now?
What? Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so we'll just go ahead and take a minute to read that first scenario.
Okay, I've read it. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah. And I just finished. So I feel like my first thought is collaboration because there's a lot of time, there's a high level of trust,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds like everyone is capable.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. Anything else? Yeah, I'm like going through them. I'm like, yeah, accommodating doesn't make sense. Avoiding doesn't make sense. Competing, no. And they haven't really reached the point where compromise might be needed. Like if they had to come up with a solution tomorrow or something, or come up with, what they're going to do tomorrow, they might need to move into compromising. But right now there's time.
Yeah, I think that sounds good too, because I feel like, if we had a little more information on like what the complex issue is and like how it impacts the deadline, compromise definitely might need to come into play if like pushing it out so far doesn't work for everyone for some reason. But for the most part, it sounds like collaboration on coming up with how to navigate this would be the best way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Liz, we were kind of going through the different options and came up with the collaboration being the top one to use, and then potentially compromise if needed based on what the issue is and kind of how it impacts the deadlines. And Krista went through the other ones and talked about how those wouldn't necessarily need to be used in this situation. So
Great, sounds good. All right,
Yeah.
keep going. You got a few more minutes. All right.
yeah. Anything else that you guys want to add?
I don't think so. I know I'm like, wow, this was pretty easy.
Yeah, that
Like,
one was an easy one.
Yeah, I feel like real life is never that easy,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I like the since we just have extra time. I like the questions of just like things to consider going forward of what um conflict management style to try to use ideally if you have time to like reflect on it.
Yeah, definitely. Those are very helpful.
Yeah, it definitely depends on if you have time, I guess. Like, more than like 30 seconds or something.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a lot of the time it's kind of like, and now we're going to discuss this right now. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I liked with this and I like having this guide to just kind of refer back to, but yeah, just like the affirmation that all of them are useful in different contexts and can be bad in other contexts. And yeah, just the need to like understand what they all are and like where they can be most useful. And I know that just kind of takes practice and like reflection.
Yeah, and it's nice to just have the 5 different like buckets to actually like, delineate to and draw from, instead of just being like, what do I do?
Yeah, like if there were more details about the scenario, if it were like, oh, you're really busy with your own thing and this thing is not that important. Like maybe actually, even if you have a great team and you have time to work on something, maybe the better thing is like, you know what, I'm gonna avoid this and like you do whatever you want, or or accommodation, like I'm not gonna be part of this. You just decide what you want.
Right.
We'll probably only have time for one. Oh, so we should do the second scenario. Um, I don't know if you guys read the second scenario. I guess in that one, maybe competing. I don't know if like she doesn't have time and you have an idea.
Yeah, I think competing was my first thought as well.
Oh, okay. Breakout rooms will close soon. Haley, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that is also true, and kind of saying like, weighing out what the needs are, and like trying to advocate for yourself, especially if you want to get things moving on the research and on the project, is important in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. All right, people are coming back. I know we've only got like 4 minutes. I'm sorry, I got messed up on time somewhere. So any spokespersons, I'm thinking we can at least talk about the first one, and I know one group at least worked on the second one as well. So we don't have time to go back into breakout rooms for that. Maybe others did too. They could talk us through their thought process on that one as well. Any brave soul to lead us off with scenario 1 on what your group thought and why? That's an important part too, like why you came to that conclusion. What are the factors you considered? Who wants to go?
I can talk about our group.
Okay, Jeff, thanks.
So we decided that collaboration would be the best, given the information that we had, because the employees all seemed like they were competent and had opinions that would be well-founded. These people have a pretty high level of trust in each other. There's a lot of time, and it seems like this would be an important decision. So that's why we decided on collaboration.
Wonderful. Anyone have a different answer? I mean, either give me a thumbs up if you also chose collaboration for similar reasons. Not everyone has their thumb up. Okay, but I'm guessing that covers all 3 groups. Okay, there we go. I guess that covers all 3 groups. Anyone have a different rationale that they want to share? Jess covered a lot. Just feel free to unmute and just shout it out.
So yeah, mostly the same things as Jess, with like, it's a high functioning team. So that means they know how to have discussions. It's a complex issue. So this is important. It's a few months away. So therefore they have the time and energy to put into this. And then the other thing that we were sort of thinking of is that like there's some people who you're going to be working with like indefinitely, and there's going to be some people that are going to be leaving, but they're going to be here for at least a year. So
Yes.
those were sort of our 4 main reasons.
Yeah, I think between Jess's and what you just shared, that hits everything I had. As a secondary, okay, I'm looking at Katie Ray's. As a secondary, we are accommodating the faculty member as a secondary. So that was kind of your like plan B. I don't know if that's the best way to put
Yeah,
it.
I guess maybe. Yeah, it just seems like it goes hand in hand. Like we're accommodating this faculty member who wanted something that was not originally planned, and through collaboration, we can make that work.
That's an excellent observation. I hadn't thought about that, but you're 100% right. That's great observation. All right, so we've only got a minute. I know at least one group worked on 2. Want to share that real quick before we part ways? And if you have to hop off. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if Gabe and Dwayne are good, I can continue chatting for our group.
Okay, I don't hear any dissension yet. Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, for scenario 2, since we're having Sue, who's the advisor, Sue, who's the advisor, she's like working a lot, has a lot going on. She's juggling multiple projects and doing all sorts of things. And you as the trainee or advisee are trying to understand this. So we came up with the initial approach being competitive. And the reason for that is that you're confident in your ideas and what you're trying to do with this project. And then additionally, the advisor said that she's going to set time aside and that you were going to lead the meeting. So we felt like at least coming into it, that you would have this more competitive idea since you're confident in your ideas and you're leading the role. However, depending on your advisor's feedback, facial expressions, body language, or tones, then you can switch depending on how it was proceeding in the meeting that you set up with them.
Yeah, right. So this goes back to what Dwayne was saying before. You might have to shift depending on what happens to compromise or accommodate, depending on what shows up. But I too would go in with a more competitive mindset. Anyone else has something different they want to share? If you got to that, there wasn't the expectation to do that one. So if you did, great. If not, you can think about it. And now you've heard what Lottie's group shared, and I think that those are all really great points. So thanks for doing that. So questions for those who are still here. I know people have to hop off. That's the end of what I have. I'm just looking here. Yeah. Any questions or thoughts for me? I will leave those of you who are here if you want. Like when I say the word conflict now, does anything change? Does anything else come up for you?
I guess for me, it's a little bit, I don't know, like I said, initially coming into this, I never thought that avoiding in competition were like great ways going into a scenario. And so now this sort of gives me, I think, a better tool set for how to engage in different conversations and conflicts. So it feels like there's a little more, I guess, power to me to go into these conflict resolution dynamics.
Great. And hopefully that gives you a different sense of like there's an opportunity, right? There's hope. It's not all doom and gloom. Conflict isn't always doom and gloom, right? We have the skills to handle this effectively and to get a good outcome. Yeah. All right. Well, Haley, I've taken up more time than you gave me, so I'm sorry for that. But thank you for inviting me, and go to our website, reach out anytime. I'm happy to chat with all of you whenever.
Thank you so much, Liz, for being here. We really appreciate it. I think this was very valuable and, definitely tools that we can all use going forward. So thank you for your time, and thanks for being here. And thanks to everyone who joined us today.
Yes. Thanks to everyone who's here. Thank you.
You're great.
Okay.
Have a good day, everyone.
Everyone have a great day.